Welcome to All Things Policy, a daily podcast by the Takshashila Institution. We are a bunch of policy nerds based in Bengaluru, and we like bringing fresh perspectives to Indian affairs and Indian perspectives to global affairs. So grab a cup of coffee, sit back, and join us for today's chat.
Hello, everyone. Welcome to this episode of All Things Policy. I'm Suman, your host for today, and I have with me my colleague Miheer, who is a researcher of economics primarily, but has a lot of other interests. Hi, Miheer.
Hi, Suman. Nice to meet you.
Well, to come to today's episode, Miheer and I read a fascinating book, The Many Lives of Syeda X, and we thought it was only apt to discuss this over a short All Things Policy. And we have with us, and we have the honor of having with us the author here. And welcome to the show, Neha.
Thank you so much. It's my honor, actually. So thrilled.
Yeah. So welcome to the show. Welcome to Takshashila as a network itself. Today's episode is slightly different from every other because in the sense that in every episode, we pick up one policy, program, or issue and discuss it. Today, we are trying to do something different because this book is actually dealing with Neha's decades-long, painstaking research that intersect all the areas that we are interested in. Okay, so that's what makes this different because we are touching upon different aspects. We are touching upon the state, we are touching upon the society, and we're touching upon the market. Okay, so the book is The Many Lives of Syeda X, and through the next half an hour, 45 minutes or so, and we hope you will see why we say this is very different. Welcome to the show, Neha. Could you please start with introducing yourself?
Thank you so much, Suman, and thank you, Miheer. My name is Neha Dixit. I am a journalist, and I'm based in New Delhi. For the last 12 years, I've been working independently, and I look at intersections of politics, gender, and social justice. I've been a journalist for 17 years now, and Many Lives of Syeda X is my first book.
Congratulations. It's a fantastically well-written book. We enjoyed reading the book. So that's why we thought we'll have a short discussion on this, because this is something that affects all of us. And, in our cushy lives that we lead, most of us and most of our listeners are elite English-speaking, office goers and white-collared employees. We tend to look at our lives in a very narrow frame. We look at, the way it affects only us. The rest of the world seems to be invisibilized for us. So, just for our for our listeners as such, can you give like a short description of what the book is, so that we can get the listeners going with, just that hook for the book itself, although it doesn't need one.
Yes. So The Many Lives of Syeda X is basically a book that looks at last 30 years of India through the eyes of an urban, poor, migrant Muslim woman. Syeda, who was a weaver in Banaras, was displaced after the Babri Masjid demolition, after her loom was burned down by CRPF personnel. And that's when she moved to Delhi with her family. And in the last 30 years, she's done 50 jobs as a home-based worker. And home-based work essentially is the work that is a lot of women taking up in metropolitan areas. And there's a huge cheap female labor economy that exists where piece rate work is paid. And so Syeda in the last 30 years has made helmet parts, pressure cooker parts, packaged almonds, cut denim threads, to packing stationery, to making piece trainers, to doing embroidery, to making other things. Yeah, so many things. And so essentially it looks at that and how she's not just a Muslim woman, but she has multiple identities, both in terms of class and gender, and also many women around her, which is why we've called it Syeda X, because it is the story of one woman and her family. But these are there are so many women that exist around us who are doing this job, particularly as gig economy is increasing, and it is completely invisibilized from any kind of popular discourse or mainstream media. So that's what essentially the book is about.
So why did you choose to pick that? There are so many glamorous stories to be told. There are stories of women who have broken glass ceilings, achieved whatever else. Why did you choose? I mean, to tell a story of a poor migrant woman, which is not sexy in that sense, right?
So I'm still not sure why, but I'll tell you some of the reasons that come to my mind. One is, of course, my own disenchantment with mainstream media, where at one point I was working somewhere where we were categorically told that we have to only focus on the urban rich because that's our target audience. So the kind of systemic
man.
measure of working class people, the kind of selective conversations about what is happening in the world. Do not mess with the buying mood. So don't talk about the situations of the urban poor. Do not talk about the fact that if there is a fire in a factory, maybe, but not otherwise. The other thing also is increasingly I realize that because of this erasure, selective erasure of a certain class of people on the socioeconomic margins from any kind of stuff that essentially we look at or we read. I mean, people who read still would know more, but at least on your television channels, even your popular movies, particularly Hindi films, there is no conversation about people who are creating the infrastructure for the rest of the society to operate on. And also, increasingly, I've realized that a lot of people, middle class and upwards, when you talk to them about working class people, their only point of reference is a domestic worker or a driver.
You're
So,
right.
so clearly, there is no other sort of. It does not even occur that the pen you are using has been assembled by someone, or the stationery that you're using, your notepad, somebody has spiraled it. So that, and so essentially, I was looking at that, and the other reason also was that I was doing a lot of stories on sexual violence, but I realized that even in my own reportage, I was only looking at episodes and events, but not what happens before and after. And one of the prominent examples was that I had reported about sexual violence in the Muzaffarnagar riots in 2013 in North India. And some of the women had actually gone out and filed cases against the people who had perpetrated that violence. But what actually stood out for me and kind of shook me was the fact that they had to go back and work in the farms of the same people who had perpetrated that violence on them. So essentially, even the conversation of gender in the mainstream media is either sexual violence or it's something to do with reproductive health, but nothing beyond that. And so for in this situation I realized that episodic reporting of things or episodic telling of stories is not something that is helping me as an individual to understand what the world is about, and generally it is not there from in the public discourse.
Yeah, and that's why we see that the book spans like 30 years, right? From 1992 to all the way till now. So we can see in the book that there is something preceding a particular event that is happening. So if you're talking about caste violence in outside Delhi, we are seeing that there is a history to it. Why is there something to a particular thing? So I think that thing almost always gets left out in popular discourse. Okay, and of late, at least what I have seen is popular media either has glamour or it has badlands, uh, where you're only looking at macho men wielding guns and everything else. There is nothing in between that talks of ordinary people, right? Very, very few, far, very few in between. Yeah, so that is the state of whatever media, reportage, etc. But another important part that you have dealt with actually is the economy, the home-based economy, right? And Mihir has
Yeah.
some thoughts.
Um, yeah. So in public policy, we generally like to think of issues from three lenses, right? State, society, and markets. It's also called Samaj, Sarkar, and Bazaar, not in that order. Um, your book kind of covers all three. The thread of society runs through it, right? So, like the society around Seda, what forms her, what places she lives in, what kind of community she engages with. But I would like to take broader attention to the economy and state part more importantly. First, the economy. So, like you said, even in conversations about the gig economy, right? A lot of the conversations are about delivery workers or drivers because the mainstream media, the audience of the mainstream media interact with them on a daily basis. But people like Seda, who are home-based workers, peace-based workers, are not included in those in those conversations. So um, through the years that you draw the story through, India had a great economic revolution, right? So it is a phenomena that happened. So the IT revolution and everything that happened. How could you elaborate on how it was seen by Seda, right? So if this revolution happened in the cities, could you how would it relate to what the communities that Seda lived in, engaged in, interacted with that?
Thank you for that question. See, for me, like you said, last 30 years, yes, there have been many India stories, right? And
Hmm.
both in terms of economy and globalization and opening up of the markets that everybody speaks about. And at the same time, there has been, sectarianism also has simultaneously grown with globalization. For
Hmm.
example, initially, when Saida's loom was burned down, was the same time the markets opened up, and so you would see that more people were entering, weaving, which was traditionally done by certain communities, and more people were entering. And so there was more competition because of opening of the markets. The power looms were coming in, and anybody working on handlooms was displaced. And so there was increased competition, and I hate to say it, but for the lack of better words, there's more competition amongst the people who are impoverished and who are on the margins, and that is one of the reasons that leads to targeting of Saida's loom instead of other people, because uh, both sectarianism was on the rise and people wanted to take opportunity and make use of that, and also because of the economic conditions of people on the margins. So that is one story. But at the same time, you will see in these 30 years the sheer inequality that has increased. I mean, there are so many reports that say that it is now the inequality amongst the poor and the rich is higher than what it was in the colonial times, right? So that also simultaneously has increased. So when we talk about, for example, GDP or economic growth or whatever, who is it actually benefiting is something that is not often most of in the minds of the masses. That is something that debate is not there, that who is it's actually
Right.
benefiting. And the other bit also is the fact that while this is happening, Saida. So if you look at the book also, like home-based economy, how did it start? When there was more sort of emphasis on export, and so the government was facilitating that, which meant a lot of multinational companies were outsourcing all their work here in the global south and countries like India, and which meant that you really don't need to follow any labor laws, or you don't really need to provide safe workspaces or a factory floor, or even fair wages, but get that work done on a piece rate basis and get it back through. So you send it to the exporter, supplier, contractor, subcontractor, home-based worker prepares it, sends it back to the multinational companies, and which is also what Saida has done. So basically, all through these 30 years, she's got 1/5 of the daily wage and work that hasn't been more than 20-25 days a month, and that too with the assistance of her daughter Reshma. So there is no accountability. So economic growth may be happening for some select group of people, but that's really not the case for majority of the people in this country.
Yeah. What you do very well throughout the book is how you connect the times that Seda is living in and what's happening, main, breaking news in India, right? So that can be the opening of the economy, that can be the, 2006 World Cup, that can be the, nuclear treaty that India signed, etc., etc., and how that sometimes it did affect. So the story you mentioned about the World Cup, how multinational companies that want their footballs being produced in India, somehow distance themselves from the workers who actually make them, and still then when these regulations come in, they sort of find tricks to hide how they're actually getting these made. But those are affected are people like Syeda who are the actual workers, right? And all throughout the book, we can see that the state, even if when the state tries to work to do something for Seda or her community, it fails her in many ways. So even when it introduces the minimum wage law, right, home based workers not included uh, in that definition, so she's not eligible for a minimum wage. So can you elaborate on in how many different ways the state failed her and her community, and what her relationship with the government or the state then became?
So her relationship with the state has been at many levels, right? But let me just talk about, if we were just to stick to the economic angle, let me just say that the state is very gendered in the way it looks at how women should be paid and what their labor is, right? The
Right.
classic and the most thankfully talked about example is the ASHA or the ASHA workers or the midday meal cooks, right? There have been numerous stories. I had written one where the midday meal cooks in Bihar were getting 35 rupees to cook for 200 children every day. And the classic story of why they should be given an honorarium and not a salary, because cooking anyway you as a woman should do, and caregiving is something that you should do. So yeah, we'll give you an
Yeah.
honorarium, but why should you get fair wages? And that's the same sort of thing that applies in the home-based economy, because women, in my experience also, a lot of times when I would go and talk to the women and say, do you work? And they would say, no, we don't work. And then you say, no, but you are stitching footballs and I can see that. And then they say that, this is just to buy milk or grocery. So,
Yeah.
so, so the acknowledgement to yourself that you're a worker because of various patriarchal angles, that you're not able to do that. And when you don't do that, you are not asking for fair wages. And that is something that has also been exploited by this entire home-based economy.
Hmm.
So the state also is sort of non-existent
Implicit in that.
or even indifferent, or even let's just say prejudiced against the female labor. And that is why I keep saying the fact that all these categories of what is skilled work, unskilled work, all these categories don't apply any longer to how this world has changed and how people and how labor is being used, because it
Right.
requires extreme amount of skill to one day stitch footballs and next day make tea strainers, and the third day you're actually making pressure cooker parts. So you are really so it is that category of actually looking at what is skilled work and what is unskilled work and what should be the wage, that in itself is something that requires rethinking. And the state of course is benefiting, because over the years you would see that the scale, like we have had governments like the UP government and saying that we are dismissing labor laws for 3 years during COVID, right? And that was not something the public was troubled about. And to say that for 3 years you can be hired and fired and you can be made to work for 16 hours and none of the laws apply. So the state in itself, first of all, is not interested in women's labor or to acknowledge or to even make any effort. And this is across parties, let me say that. There's across parties, they are not interested in acknowledging and making the wages fair across genders. And second thing also is the fact that the sheer dismissiveness and the exploitative attitude towards any kind of labor that exists in the country, which is why nothing has happened in the last few years, if you see, and just dismissal of various kinds.
Yeah, while we are at the stage, I just want to draw the listeners' attention to regulation as a thing. You have touched upon it and how it affects people in different, different strata of society, right? Like when you talk about pollution laws and how they have they actually displaced Syeda and her family to the outskirts. And then there is no public provisioning of public goods in those places. And therefore, health takes a toll. Everything is off for them. So if we're talking about regulation and if we're talking about the state's role itself in all this, did I mean, is there that much of a blindness to this whole thing that these are a group of people that regulation should take care of? And I think the absence of state capacity to look after what, I mean, the Supreme Court will say what it has to say, but the capacity has to come from the state to either rehabilitate them into better places or give fair wages. What has been your experience in documenting this? Have you, I mean, how do the affected people look at this?
Suman, it's very important, and when I think of it more and more, we also need to decode what the state thinks its ideal citizen is. And for the state, the ideal citizen is middle class and upwards, right? Because the state is always trying to get the approval and validation of this citizen, which has a little bit of privilege. So you can tell this citizen that, oh, we got digital India and internet for you, and oh, we got smart cities for you, and oh, our GDP is this, and oh, we went abroad and did this for India, and this is our image. But in the citizen that the state imagines, anybody on any kind of socioeconomic margin, it does not really exist, and they don't feel the need to please those citizens, right? And so for Syeda, like you say, the Delhi pollution, again, now it's October, and again we'll have full conversations and air filters will be sold and all of that is going to happen. But the fact remains that how, again, it is about, like, Syeda was displaced twice or thrice almost. Because
displacement is a common theme that is running across, right? From Banaras to Delhi to...
Yeah, but because of, to be able to control pollution in Delhi, who are the people whose livelihoods are taken away and thrown away and there's no rehabilitation, is somebody like Syeda. Or the fact that anything else that happens, even digital India, for example, when it happened, and how everything became online, and most of the people, they could use a smartphone and watch WhatsApp forwards, but we literally did not have any skills to use or to get their documents online, or to get or for the fact that your Aadhaar has been linked to your PDS ration shop. And so for the longest time, and we've had so many reports where women are the people who actually go to the ration shops because the men are out working. And because you do hard labor, you don't have fingerprints. And so they don't match at the PDS shop, which means you don't get ration. And the only way to then get it is to send an OTP to a phone number that was registered when your Aadhaar was made. And most of the women do not have phones, or if they have phones, the numbers have changed. So there have been reports of starvation deaths in Jharkhand and many other places. So how all of this is completely what the state thinks you can actually do these cruel things and get away with it, and they have been getting away with it. Or the fact, like you say, that once you're pushed on the outskirts, there is no public transport. Every day we see beautification of all our metro cities that happen, and we have these beautiful walking paths and footpaths and palm trees, which shouldn't be there in North India, but they're there. And then there are no cycle lanes for the thousands of people who work, because Delhi again is the wholesale center for many things in Asia, one of the largest wholesale centers on many things. It has large number of small and medium industrial units. So it employs people. It has the largest migration in North India, that people come and settle. But we don't have affordable housing. So we have space. We have space on the outskirts in your Gurgaon and Noida, where people are buying their second homes or third homes as investments. But the same space cannot be allocated to make affordable housing for people who are actually creating these suburbs and creating these houses. So why is the state not determined to do that? Is clearly because it does not care. I'm not invested, and there is no political will beyond getting votes in those particular elections, and that's about it. So where Syeda now lives, which is a place called Nasbandi Colony, which is again in the outskirts of Delhi, and it's called Nasbandi Colony because these were plots that were allocated around sterilization program.
Yeah,
and it's one of the most, and I have visited many places, but it's one of the most let's say, ignored places, because there is slush, people have to always walk through slush to be able to reach the road. And this is how people are living. And there's a big industrial city called Tronika Industrial City. And there are workers again who live here. But you don't care. So in Delhi, and that's probably true for a lot of Indian cities. Where I live in Delhi, there is no power cut. But there is immediately like a working class neighborhood in front of my house, settlement, and you see that there is a power cut every day there for 3 hours. So how the state is also selective in providing amenities to a certain class of people, not to the others, and that is something that remains consistent.
Okay. So, yeah, the regulation part, pollution was just one. And I think the book details a lot of other issues or the state level issues that, starting from just basic law and order. If the CRPF people who are supposed to be, guarding your life or ensuring law and order, if they are the ones who are creating, who are actually burning down your looms or whatever, I think that actually changed the course of life for her in a lot of ways, right? My sympathy also lies with her husband, because that is the only skill he knew. And if that person has to come to Delhi and pull a rickshaw, it will have immense, it has effect on a person's psyche, a person's self-esteem, everything that goes around with it. I'm not condoning what he did in terms of either whatever drinking, whatever else that he was doing, but it is an important factor when you look at what the state is doing. So, fine. I want to come to the intersectionality, because I spoke about the husband being poor, being a woman, and being a Muslim, right? The three things. And the thing that stood out for me was the husband being manmoji. I like that reference that you had. Can you just explain what it is? I don't want to give too much to the listeners because I want them to read the book, but if you can just...
Yeah. See, Akmal, like you say, he's manmoji, and he specialized in weaving a very particular kind of Banarsi sari, and with pride. So his thing was, I am only going to weave the ones that I like and the way I like, and I'm going to dye the yarn myself to weave those saris. From that to being reduced to a porter, and then to a cart rickshaw puller, is not just completely taking away. It is not just livelihood for him. He enjoys the work that he is doing. And so you've basically taken that away, and you've also marginalized this person because this is a Muslim man, and you have subjected him to all kinds of brutality, violence, and then detained him and put him in jail and then thrown him out. So that's one bit of it. The second bit also is the fact that when he comes to Delhi, how he is no longer that special person that he used to be. And so he wants to be the primary breadwinner. He tries for a bit and tries to do all these things at home and telling Syeda to dress up for him and stuff like that. But he's not able to hold on to it. And that's a pattern that continues every once in a while. Also, the fact that all the pressures of masculinity that sort of apply to him as well, but he's not able to live up to that. His children, his boys don't look up to him. They don't want to be like him. And at the same time, the fact that it's really interesting that for his daughter, like Reshma, he is the one who's able to hold out the emotional space to be able for her to...
She has a very difficult relationship with Reshma.
Right? But not with Syeda. So there are gender stereotypes that are always changing. The other conversation, of course, is about mental health, Suman, because increasingly we see, and I have also covered many stories, and increasingly we see that in a lot of urban poor areas and even rural areas, you see that that's the women who are working and men are usually alcoholic. But it is directly related with the mental health conversation. And so now in this world that we live in, the mental health conversation again is very elite, right? It's only people, and it's also very individualistic in a way that if you don't like someone, cut them off. But you basically do not take into account the fact that people cannot afford to cut other people off, because if you're living in a joint family or if you're living in a community and you're dependent, you can't do that. Number one, and there is no state support. So the only thing that is accessible is alcohol. And so he keeps going back to it. And that's the larger conversation about masculinity in this country, where there are pressures. We talk about women empowerment. So he is living with an empowered woman, but he's not able to deal with his wife who's an empowered woman. So again, all of these things need to be addressed, and there's no structural support to address alcoholism, which is basically a huge mental health crisis that is unfolding and already has unfolded. So for Akmal, it is that. And on the other side, for Syeda, who's supposed to go out and do things and who's taken up the responsibility and taken the initiative to keep everyone going, how she keeps losing her own
identity, her life,
human side, the gentler side of someone who was thrilled about films and said that I'm only going to marry someone who's interested in films, and had just seen Tezab and Madhuri Dixit and all that, and then to a point where she doesn't even like to talk or to look into the mirror or even have any sort of gentle conversation with her children.
So stuck, or she's caught up in the everyday.
Yes.
Because the pressure to put food on the woman never goes away.
Yes.
Right?
Yeah.
So we're talking about home-based economies, we're talking about society, we're talking about the state and all those things that affect us.
Along with, being a poor Muslim woman, I think one other point of, marginalization that she has is that she's also a migrant, right? And that she has to move away from her home into a new city and the challenges that come with that. So I just want to put that out there. So kind of pose you another story from another part of India similar to this, right? So the Lijjat Papad story is a very successful, celebrated story about, home-based workers coming together, forming a kind of cooperative to empower themselves to build a business. So what do you think stopped someone like Syeda from doing that, getting into entrepreneurship, trying to build her own business, trying to get people together? What is this any kind of, marginalization that we mentioned right now that contributed to that stopped her or, anyone around her from doing that? It's like,
of course, I mean, everybody looks at Lijjat Papad as the example where women have formed a cooperative, but we also need to see why it has not been replicated in many places, and why don't we have that many cooperatives now since Lijjat Papad came up. And that's also something that says about how how work and how home-based economy has changed, because it's no longer one thing that you can afford to make, because the work that comes to you and how it is always changing every 2 weeks, 3 weeks, it is changing. So you can't really even take a moment away to think about, okay, I want to stick to one work. That is a privilege that most of the women workers do not have now. That's number one. And the second thing also is the fact that how traditional unions, for example, have not been able to integrate questions of home-based workers. And that's why in the book also, if you see, for example, in 2009, Syeda at one point used to, and still does every winter, actually, a lot of home-based workers in Delhi take up the work for cleaning and shelling almond kernels and cleaning them and packaging them. And in 2009, Syeda also takes up that work, and eventually a lot of women come together and there's a strike because they're paid 40 rupees to clean a 23 kg bag that takes 12 to 16 hours a day. And these are almonds that come from the Western world. So California Almonds and many other companies are basically sending it to this part of the world for cleaning and packaging and sending them back. And so she also does that. And after the strike, because this is New Year's and Christmas is in the Western world and the almonds are used quite a bit, because of the strike, the global rates for almonds go up. And they finally managed to get a 10 rupee raise. So Reshma, Syeda's daughter, she laughs also that you did all this and you got a 10 rupee raise. But
just a 10 rupee raise.
Yeah, Syeda turns around and says that first thing, okay, nobody listens to us. Each time we demand something, we demanded something and something happened. That in itself is such a moral boost. And second thing, of course, 10 rupees per day, which means that you can buy more groceries for the next 15 days. So that was Syeda's answer. And that happened because they tried to make a union of the home-based workers who were doing the almond work at a mohalla level. So they formed a union of home-based workers basically in the same neighborhood, because most home-based workers can do different work, but they don't have the same factories floor, or they don't do the same work, but they live in the same area. And that's how you form a union, and you can demand for better working conditions or even basic wage. So that has happened.
Yeah.
So what I want to say is that because you raised the legit purpose answer, that does not any longer stay, because any kind of work or stability or even the space to come together to think about a cooperative or think about unionizing is something that is extremely difficult given the conditions that no 20 people are doing the same work in the same neighborhood.
Right.
And even when I talk about this Mohalla level union that was made, they were not able to sustain it. So again, there hasn't been enough thinking or a lot of attempts may have been made, but they're not successful in bringing a set of people together and demanding basic rights. And the other thing is also here when we keep talking about the state, everybody hates the state's interference, because what the state does every once in a while is some labor inspector going to come and close your quote unquote factory, which the women call, which basically is not technically a factory, a sweatshop, but it is, for them it is factory. We call it factory. But they just come and seal it.
Have to close it down. Yeah.
Or even the same thing for all the child rights activists. Like, they hate all the child rights activists because they basically
taking away our livelihood.
Yeah, because there's nothing solid that happens at the end of the day, because you're picked up and you're taken and the same drill happens. So in terms of how to fix this, maybe we can't fix it enough if we don't take more people into conversation. And the traditional methods are also not working. So maybe that.
Yeah, just to relate to the point that we were making previously about the state intervening influence, right? So in a lot of cases that you mentioned in the book, unintended consequences of the policies that have been introduced are totally ignored. So, like you said, so when child right activism was in a high, which is a very good thing. Children that are, even you mentioned in your book that children are forced to work for long hours with, they're given bread with iodix laid on it to make them, work more efficiently, which is a terribly bad thing. But the unintended consequence of that is that the police just come to your home, raid it, take your child away, and then have to beg them to, release your child out of jail. Even, for example, the labor law that you mentioned, because they have been put. Labor laws are so restrictive that the women that are needed to work there have to climb out of a window at night, which is extremely unsafe and dangerous, because they still have to work, right? So a lot of these unintended consequences of policies that are actually made with good intentions are just ignored, and people who are the most marginalized have to bear them, even though they are of good intentions. Yeah.
Yeah, I mean, the health conversation here, basically the almond factories are basically, they release a lot of dust, right? When you break the shells and you package it.
Yeah.
And so that's why you can't have them in residential areas. So what does the state do? Every once in a while, they come and seal it. And so, which is why the work will continue, but the work now has to continue even more surreptitiously, which means, like you said, there's a window, you enter at 2 a.m. and you get out at 2 p.m. And for those 12 hours, you cannot go pee, you cannot go eat something, you cannot go get fresh air. You have to be in that dingy basement and do that work. So eventually, of course, it is for the health of everybody, but the health of the worker is not priority for anybody, right? And so for a lot of people on the margins, the only asset they have is their body, right? If you're unwell, you can't go out next day and work, which means you don't have food, right? Sorry for that simple sort of way of saying it, but that is how it works. So, but that saving the asset that the poor have, which is their body, is something that is not priority for anybody trying to fix the problem. So there is a gap in how things are conceptualized and how it actually unfolds on the ground. If you were giving fair wages to Syeda, if she was getting 400 rupees per day, maybe she is not going to get her daughter to do that work with her. But if you give time-based wages that you're working for 8 hours, these are your wages, maybe she'll not push her daughter to not go to school and do that work. But that happens. She'll have to use child labor and whatever it can be categorized as. So the things at the ground, how they unfold is completely different. For example, even, Saida was very irritated with me when she said that, I used to roll these agarbattis, and agarbattis, we had some packaging of a cow with like gold ornaments. And then I realized, okay, like some cow urine product is being made here. And I got really like, okay, what cow urine product are you making? And I asked her, how did you roll the agarbattis? And she was really irritated. She said, I'm telling you about how Banarsi saris are woven. And you want to know about agarbattis? Don't you have any whatever? But why I'm talking about this is because how, for example, how as a storyteller, I thought, okay, this is important bit that I need to include. But for somebody like Saida, that is not important. This is just another job that she's doing and probably getting better wages than she was getting otherwise. Or similarly, like once I tried to sit with my notebook and started asking, so what all work did you do? What were you being paid? Where was this? And she really again got irritated and she said, well, I don't remember. Why are you asking me all this? You ask a construction worker how many houses he has constructed and what are the addresses and what are the names of the owners. Because that information is not important in her life. What is important is this week I have this job and next week I may have another job. And that's about it. So even thinking about all this data, categories, all of these things don't really apply on the ground. Like I have had so many people talking to me about how can you say they're paid 1/5 the daily wage? Because this is not what data says. There are lots of data, like in this world of big data where everybody has been reduced to a number. Actually, it really doesn't matter whether it's 5 rupees more or 5 rupees less. But basically, this is the life that people are leading. And that has to come together to understand what is happening. So all the research, all the state intervention, all the technical studies, if they are done in silos, then you're clearly not looking at in how many ways people are being marginalized on the ground.
It's a very sobering take on this situation on the ground. But what I saw in the book was there were enough and more instances of, say, sisterhood, of camaraderie, of positive, of hope, of, all of those things. So, to tell our listeners that, there is a lot there. In the midst of all this that's happening, there are some green shoots, or there are some, things that give us hope, right? So to capture, how did you feel when you were actually talking to I thought Reshma's story was that of great hope. I really liked. I also liked the story of the woman who is the leader there.
Radio Wali.
Radio
Wali. Yeah, she has no, we don't make any judgments on her morality or whatever else, but she actually has she brings the band of women together, right? So that kind of solidarity, that kind of sisterhood is very important. We often look at friendships or, all of those things in a very elitist sense, if I can use that word that way. But I thought these two were stories of hope and stories of, things that keep them afloat, maybe, right? So what was your experience actually, meeting these people, talking to them, etc.?
So like you said, Suman, the friendships emerge from the fact that who are the people who take initiative, right? So the fact that even if we are unwell and somebody comes and offers us some food, it's mostly the woman who's cooking or making sure or organizing that and making sure that it reaches us in some way. So of course the conditioning of being more, I hope nobody will cancel me for this, but like the conditioning that you're more thoughtful and more like a caregiver in some ways, you take on that role and you take that initiative to do it. For a lot of people, it started with that. For example, the person who speak about, which is Nisha Radio Wali, who basically just uses her position to say, okay, all these women are coming to work, but they're not really eating during the day. So we will just have a 20-minute break. And that is all it took, basically, for everybody to stop and sit together and eat and to have conversations. And somebody like Saida who'd stop speaking, now again to start playing whatever Antakshari. It sounds very like whatever, glorified or romantic, but no, this is how people interact with each other, and that's how it grows. Or just the ability to create a space. For example, because Nisha Radiowali is not married, and she has the money to have her own space, and which is why she can allow other women to come and basically just take a nap in her house, because the women don't get to take a nap in their own houses because they are constantly asked for this or that. Or the fact that Razia, for example, when Syeda moves to a place called Sabhapur, which is a very interesting place, but half in Delhi and half in UP, and where she moves and her daughter is crying the whole night, and next day one woman randomly walks up and says, "Here, there is namak ka paratha and chai." Nobody has asked her to do it, but she does it. So, for coming back to what your question is about solidarity and friendship, a lot of these things are built because a lot of women they're almost passing on whatever solidarity and kindness they received. Like in Karawal Nagar, I mentioned this in the book also. It's really nice that they say that ek aur aa gayi Akash Napne, which is for every migrant woman who comes to Karawal Nagar, which is basically one more woman has come to measure the sky. So how are you measuring the sky? Of course, not alone in the Netflix way where one person goes and conquers the world. Conquering the world happens because you have a community, and you have a community of all these women around you. Similarly for Reshma, she's younger. She doesn't like the low energy her mother has. Her mother also was high energy at one point, but with life, it has come down. And so Reshma is like, I want to see the world. I want to do my things. I don't want to be a victim, and I will do it my way. I don't like my mother being so rude to me all the time and so flavorless, which she was at one point, flavorful, but so flavorless. And Reshma says, okay, I'll do my own thing and I'll figure out. And all my brothers, who were clearly my mother's favorites, have sort of done their own thing, but I'll do it. I'll take on the responsibility, but I'll do it in my own way. So she does not give up. So all these things are happening. It also reminds me of the earlier question that Miheer asked about electronics and IT boom and whatever. While IT boom was happening, there were all these hardware companies and electronics industries that were being set up in various parts of the country, including Delhi and Noida, where Nisha Radiowali, she got her name Radiowali because they used to look for young adolescent girls with nimble fingers to be able to make those hardwares, from starting from TV antenna to various other things and then computer hardware. And so IT boom was happening, but some cheap labor was being used to enable a lot of it that was happening otherwise. Those are the things that, and such is life, because yes, there are traumas and there is marginalization, but at the same time there is friendship, and I'm not glorifying it, I keep saying that, but because this is life, you have friends, you get through things, you move forward, there is no closure, then something else happens. So there are these communities and people who take initiative, who have benefited from the kindness of other people, and they sort of reciprocate. So yeah.
So it's actually the individuals who, help each other out and whatever, get the entire thing moving in front.
But right? Suman, the most important thing is, it's only when you receive kindness is when you are able to give it.
That's true.
All the women are here have received kindness from other people, and so they know how to give it further to people. And so that is the important bit, that if you've never been treated kindly, then you don't know how to treat other people kindly.
Yeah. So we can go on for a lot more time. I can talk about, I would love to have talked about the riots and how they affected. They're really, really sobering in so many ways that we can't even imagine, because for us, it's a world that is entirely different. But I think the listeners should read the book for that. I also like the entire, story about this whole thing about moving place to place. Would her destiny be different if they had not taken the train to Delhi? Instead, they would have gone to, Kanpur or Lucknow or something. Yeah, Lucknow. If they had gone to Lucknow, what would her life be like? Right? There were so many things, so many thoughts that came to mind when I read the book. At this point, we have to close, but some closing comments from both of you, and then we can call it a day for today, and we'll leave it. I think we need to leave something for the listeners to read in the book. We can't give out everything, right? Miheer, you want to go first?
I'm thinking a lot of things. I don't know how to put it in words really, but there's so much that you write about that I wouldn't even have imagined if I hadn't read the book, right? So, in so many ways that we don't think about, that the state helps us, that society benefits us, and it failed in so many ways for Syeda that it was pretty interesting to read. So I think like that is something that we shouldn't take for granted, I guess. And thinking about, you know, policies, making policies, that we should think in how many ways the government has the responsibility to help people that should carry out. It's something we should remember.
Thank you for that, Neil. I also would like to say that generally, I think the state and all the players around us want to constantly tell us how to think and conceptualize things on the ground in a very structured, homogenized, uniform way. But that is not how things are on the ground. And that is not how life unfolds for people from various socioeconomic conditions. And the fact that how, to a large extent, we have been conditioned and almost brainwashed to erase how we would like to think that we are very upright and correct citizens of the country and always doing the right legal things that are needed. But actually, that's not how things are, because even we are part of it, and we also benefit from the fact that a lot of people have been invisibilized, and the work they do is actually enabling the work that we do. They have built the infrastructure that they have been denied, and that does not seem to exist in our imaginations. So I would really like to say that if only, and when I say they, I do want to say that I want to acknowledge the privilege that I'm coming from, and I want to also point out that a lot of us are privileged. So if only we start noticing how everything around us is coming from people who are not getting fair wages and fair situations to exist, that in itself is going to change how we think about the world.
Thanks, Neha. That was a great, summary of sorts. I think that's where we were going with this episode too, just to let our listeners know that this is another way of looking at all the things that we see around us. And this book really gives us a great perspective on what it is, on what life is for people who are not like us, right? And to bring in more people into the conversation on policy, to bring in relevant stakeholders in all policy making is one thing that, as all policy professionals or policy enthusiasts, we should, there's never an understating of that. That's what I want to just leave everyone with. Thank you, everyone, for joining us today. Thank you, Neha, especially for being so kind to be on this show with us. Thanks.
Thank you so much. It was great talking to you both.
Thanks, Miheer.
Thanks.
If you liked our show, dive into Takshashila's research on technology, strategy, and economic affairs. Check us out at our Twitter handle @Takshashila INST or our website takshashila.org.in.